Time flies like a thief in the night. We all got a story to write. So darling, jump in the ride before the train is gone. Let's take a ride. Look in your eyes. Don't make them tell you lie. I'm on your side. I saw the taxi chaka to my raka to the vida. We gon' get high tonight, baby. We say pass the dirty on the left hand side, yeah. Oh yeah. Muda una yoyoma, so you never know what tomorrow holds. Siku zazidi kwenda, so don't hold back. Do what you gotta do. Take some love and give it back. Make your money, get that back. I don't know what you're going through, yeah. This is your invitation to dance. Salty soul burner boy came through with another one, yeah. So come on and give love a chance, yeah. Cause you know the party just begun, yeah. Time flies like a thief in the night. We all got a story to write. So darling, jump in the ride before the train is gone. Let's take a ride. Look in your eyes. Don't make them tell you lie. I'm on your side. Doctor, enter boss, in the good church, he enter boss. Doctor, he enter boss, he no get money, he enter boss. Conductor, so one papo, we are conductor, so one papo. Doctor, enter boss, in the good church, he enter boss. See where is it, ni malipala na maudi na mashuga na mavela. Are we gon' get high tonight, my lady? I miss the boss, the touch, miss the boss, the touch. Oh yeah, rumba imetamba sana nana. Siwezi wacha vodka na mavela nana.
From the Niger Delta to all the corners of Africa, America, and the world, Black people are turning the tables, taking back our place. We will be heard because we matter.
Greetings, everyone. Habari gani to those based in Kenya. Time flies, Burna Boy sings. We all have a story to write. It's been 10 years since Dr. Mwenda Ntarangwi published Reverse Gaze, an African ethnography of American anthropology. And today we're here to celebrate this groundbreaking text, but also speak to its relevance during our current Black Lives Matter era. I am Nadej No. I'm an aspiring Caribbeanist and a doctoral student at the University of South Florida's Applied Anthropology program. I will be your moderator here today, and thank you for joining us on Indigenous Peoples' Day. So when I first proposed some dates with Mwenda and Faye, you know, I picked this date and I picked some dates after this, and they said, no, we got to do Indigenous Peoples' Day. So this event is certainly timely, and I'm just so glad that you can join us. Before we get started, I wanted to briefly go over our roundtable agenda. So for the first hour to hour and 15 minutes, We're going to be discussing the significance of the text and then some thematic prompts based off of the text. And then we're going to dedicate about 30 to 45 minutes to Q&A towards the end. So please sit tight. But for right now, I'm going to ask you to refrain from sharing your audio and video because we're trying to preserve bandwidth. So if your video is stopped, you know, or if you're silenced, it's because we're trying to preserve our bandwidth. But definitely we want you to engage with us towards the last 30 to 45 minutes. You'll be able to ask your questions live. You can use the chat feature to do that, or you can use the raise your hand feature and you can turn on your audio and your video to ask the questions. So please sit tight. So now I'd like to thank our sponsors, Dr. Fenda Akiwumi of USF's Institute on Black Life, the Anthropology Department's Graduate Student Organization and its Committee on Diversity and Inclusion. A special shout out to Dylan, my advisor. He helped me a lot behind the scenes, and I'd be remiss if I didn't shout him out. And lastly, I'd like to say a special thanks to Dr. Antoinette Jackson, our chair in the Applied Anthropology Department. And I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Jackson to share a few words with you.
Hello, everyone. So good to see the amount of people that have joined this Zoom meeting today, or Zoom celebration and presentation. So thank you. Many of the people I've known for a long time. So again, welcome, welcome. As the chair of the Department of Anthropology, I want to extend a warm welcome to you and to thank you for joining us today. For me, as a new chair and the first Black chair of the Department of Anthropology, this is the first time that I've been called upon to do an official public welcome. So you are first, along with I, in terms of a public welcome outside of my department duties, internal duties. So welcome, and thank you too for being a first. With this in mind, it's fitting to welcome and to acknowledge the ancestors. I would like to acknowledge the ancestors, all those who have gone before me to make this moment possible. I cannot understate the amount of people that I don't known and unknown who have paved the way for me. And I want to thank them and give them a shout out, as Nadej did for everyone else. I want to shout out to the ancestors and take this moment to thank them for making this all possible. Particularly on this day, Indigenous People Day, I want to thank the ancestors and say Ashe. Focusing on this event, I am thrilled to recognize the outstanding work of graduate students in our program, like Nadej Noel, and thank her for addressing these critical issues facing our world and our discipline through her research and passion. There are many students in our department and program like Nadej, so I would like you all to think about them, and I want to thank them for their contributions. Additionally, this event puts into focus the work of faculty members such as Dr. Dylan Mahoney and their role in supporting and mentoring our grad students. This showcases this type of work. Again, there are many faculty in our department who do that type of work, and I want to say a big thank you to Nadej Noel and to Dylan Mahoney for their work. But let me say I'm most thrilled to welcome our panelists today and thank them for participating, and they will be introduced later. I want to extend, though, a warm welcome to Dr. Faye Harrison and thank her most importantly for being involved in this and agreeing to participate. And I want to acknowledge the support of the Association of Black Anthropologists, ABA, for their support of this effort. Again, it's truly an honor to welcome Dr. Faye Harrison. She's a remarkable thinker, writer, leader, a pioneer, and I want to publicly thank her for personally being that for me and paving the way for much of the work I've done over these years. So thank you, Dr. Faye Harrison. I want to give, before I end this, give two things about our department and leave you with two things about our department before I close. First, our department at USF, if you don't know, is known for its applied anthropology focus. We bring anthropology out of the classroom and into the places where people live, work, and leisure. We put theory to work. The second thing I want to leave you with is that we are making social justice our mission here in the Department of Anthropology and increasing our focus on diversity and inclusion with an emphasis on education and action. Our goal is to contribute to in all the ways we can to rooting out, challenging, and eliminating systems and practices that perpetuate and give haven to racism, and particularly anti-Black racism. We have work to do. We all still have much work to do. And this session is the first step, or one step, in towards educating us and arming us to do this work. Again, thank you for joining us and welcome. I will turn it back over to Nadege.
Thank you, Dr. Jackson, for that warm welcome. So we have a great lineup of speakers here today, because I know you didn't join us today to hear me speak. So here to help us celebrate reverse gaze, we have Dylan Mahoney. Dylan did his research in coastal Kenya and published his first book titled The Art of Connection in 2017. The book focuses on the culture of entrepreneurialism that surrounds Kenya's coastal tourism industry. His current research focuses on refugees from the Democratic Republic of the Congo in Florida, and he has been involved in a host of recent projects on refugees and COVID-19. Then we have Tayo Jolaosho. She is an anthropologist who focuses on the interdisciplinary intersections of performance, politics, and embodiment in South Africa. Her current book project is titled You Can't Go to War Without Song, Performance and Community Mobilization in Post-Apartheid South Africa. Building on her background in performance and activism, she advances feminist political theory through her study of activist practices and commitments to gender equity. So now we have a heavy hitter, Faye Harrison. I mean, before I start, her introduction, Faye Harrison is cited heavily throughout the text, Reverse Gaze. So I would be remiss if I didn't invite her to join us in this panel, because her work has been foundational for, Dr. Ntarangwi's work and also for my work. So Faye Harrison is a professor of African American Studies and Anthropology at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. She's affiliated with the Center of African Studies and the Center of Latin American and Caribbean Studies. She earned her PhD in social anthropology at Stanford University, where, among others, she worked with Pan-Africanist scholar St. Clair Drake. Among her scholarly interests are the history and politics of anthropology and the divisions of intellectual labor within world anthropologies. She's the editor of 3 editions of Decolonizing Anthropology, Moving Further Toward an Anthropology for Liberation, and this came out in 1991. So that means we have to celebrate Decolonizing Anthropology next year for the 30th anniversary. She's the co-editor with the late Ira E. Harrison of African American Pioneers in Anthropology and author of Outsider Within, Reworking Anthropology in the Global Age. Dr. Harrison is the immediate past president of the International Union of Anthropological and Ethnological Sciences and the founding co-chair of the World Anthropological Union, the bicameral organization to which IUAES and the World Council of Anthropological Associations belong. In 2018, she received a presidential award from the American Anthropological Association for her contributions to the global unification of anthropology. So now, the man of the hour, Mwenda Ntarangwi is a Kenyan cultural anthropologist and the author of the book we are here to discuss and celebrate. After studying Swahili cultural studies at Kenyatta University, he earned his PhD in anthropology from the University of Illinois in 1998. His other major works include the edited volume, African Anthropologies, History, Critique, and Practice. I love this book. You got this book too. And monographs such as East African Hip Hop, Youth Culture, and Globalization, and The Street is My Pulpit, Hip Hop and Christianity in Kenya. He has held professorships at Augustana College and Calvin College, and Mwenda is currently the CEO of the Commission for the University Education in Kenya. And that's where he is joining us here today from Kenya. So before turning the spotlight onto Mwenda, let's discuss the significance of this text really quickly. I'll go first. So this book is my anthropology Bible. You see right here, this is my Bible. Mwenda, you demystify the field and its inner workings through your own journey as a Kenyan navigating graduate school in the US, and then you navigate us through your professional career. But you provide insight on the field, not only through your observations, but through your discussion of African anthropologies. Especially for those like me starting my journey, this book has the power to inform whether or not you're going to pursue the discipline. because you articulate both the strengths and weaknesses of the field, and you make a case for applied anthropology to help elevate the discipline's role and relevance in parts of Africa where anthropology has a bad reputation due to its colonial ties, whereas sociology is more of a respectable career because you're studying complex societies. But you debunk this myth that applied anthropology and the more theoretical classical anthropology are binary opposites. In fact, they both inform each other. And this was very beneficial for me considering I'm in an applied program. And as I think about my future career, I question my ability to attain what you call anthropological citizenship on page 16. So who possesses anthropological citizenship? As anthropologists, we study migration, citizenship, and belonging. But when reversing the gaze, you'll notice the social reproduction within the field. There are politics built on societal prejudices that steer whose work gets celebrated, cited, and canonized. Thus, this is based on one's color, gender, language that they publish in, how exotic their field site or research topic is. Do Native anthropologists possess anthropological citizenship? We know they're citizens in their field site, but are they celebrated? What about ethnomusicologists? We talk about decolonizing, but these are the people who are studying music and folkloric traditions that oftentimes possess unwritten alternative epistemologies. I think sooner or later, those with high-speed internet and the ability to conduct online FRVs will possess anthropological citizenship. I think this question of belonging is twofold for anthropologists of color here in the US. We are the others in the field and in society. So I really appreciate this term in your critical lens. And that's why we're here to celebrate this text day, to deviate from the status quo on Indigenous Peoples' Day. So I'm gonna turn it over to Dylan on the significance of the book. Please speak on the significance of this.
Sure, thanks so much for having me. And I'd just like to start by saying I'm so proud of Nadej for putting this together and you know, from something that was just a small idea 2 months ago, you know, to have so many people together on this is really great. So thanks everybody for being here. Really briefly, you know, it's funny, I am somebody who did field work in the same place that Mwenda originally did field work, and now I'm doing what he talks about in the book, and I'm studying an African population back here in the US. And rather than being critical of this book, I think it's just absolutely important and it applies to everyone. And I agree pretty much with everything in the book. I think this should be, you know, required reading for people going into grad school. I think it's funny. I think discussions of grad seminars and the AAA were things that for me, when I first discovered this book 10 years ago, so I'm really glad that it's been something that Nadej refers to her as her Bible, but it's something that's so important to have as a guide. And I think, you know, this is a discussion for all anthropologists and, you know, a good thing for all anthropologists to think through as we think about some of the powers in the field. You know, and I got my PhD in 2009, which was a rough year to get a PhD. And I think it's similar to these days when, you know, there's not a lot of jobs, unfortunately. And I think this is going to be a tough, you know, upcoming job market. And there's a lot of uncertainty. And I remember thinking to myself as, you know, just like a visiting teacher here and there, teaching like Anthropology of Africa courses, how do I understand myself as an anthropologist, right? And this book, as well as Africanist anthropology, actually, I found to be really hopeful in terms of breaking down and simplifying anthropology for what we do as anthropologists, despite all of the issues in our past, and how we can, you know, find the common ground to move forward. And despite all the criticism of anthropology that I think is really necessary and wonderful personally, you know, it was a book that actually gave a lot of optimism to me. And I think it's provided some optimism to others. And I think that's great. And I think that is, you know, despite all of the things happening and the uncertainty in the world, I think it's nice to have this as a guiding post for a lot of us. So thank you for writing the book. And I look forward to hearing from the rest of you here.
Hi, everyone. I have to join in the vote of thanks for all of us gathering here and coming around together to celebrate this insightful book. And also, I am really proud of Nadej, right, for bringing all of this together. And I can't imagine that I am I mean, it is happening, but I really can't imagine or believe that I am on this panel. Um, so I mean, the prompt is to speak from personal experience about the significance of this book. And let me just give you a little bit of background about myself. I was born and raised in Nigeria, and I came to the United States to begin 8th grade. And so from 8th grade onward, my education has been in the United States. I didn't have any background in anthropology. I chose, I studied as an undergrad, I studied music and integrated arts in a liberal arts, institution, because music was my passion, and that's what I was going to throw my heart into. When it was time for me to go into graduate school, I knew that I was not going to go into musicology because of this separation, this separation around Western epistemology, where the study of other folks' music is ethnomusicology and not recognized as musicology. In any case, I was considering quote unquote ethnomusicology, and I had the opportunity to attend an international human rights exchange workshop in South Africa, where I met the anthropologist Anne-Maria Makulu. And I asked her that question, that perennial question that Mwenda brings up in Reverse Gaze. Why anthropology given its colonial legacies? Why? Why are you an anthropologist? I asked her. And she responded, anthropology is the only discipline within the social sciences that allows for the study and engagement of people on their own terms. On their own terms. And so, she piqued my interest, and I was like, all right, fine. I guess I'll go study and investigate whether or not I believe that. And that led to a decision to go to grad school for anthropology. So in a way, there are some parallels or some similarities between my experience and what Mwenda details in Reverse Gaze. And this is a book that I wish I had read as a graduate student, because for sure it would have been my Bible. And the thing is that this book allows us to not only critique the discipline of anthropology, it allows us to critique the training of anthropology and the racial disparities, in particular, the racial disparities that exist within the people who are teaching, among the people who are teaching this discipline, particularly among recognized graduate programs, and the students that are coming in that are being trained up into this discipline. And so within my particular program, I had to, in a sense, look outside for the resources that were pertinent to me and to my interest as a racialized subject, right? And in similar ways to what Mwenda had to do, this was additional reading. This was finding affiliations through associations like the Association for Black Anthropologists, Association of Black Anthropologists. And so there are many elements in which this book remains completely relevant. And what I wanted to say about that is that many of us are called, in a sense, to take on an additive practice, right? That of training ourselves in addition to the training that we're receiving within our programs, and then having to train our teachers, right, in order to train us. And I'm going to say something that may be provocative. I don't really know, but I truly believe that folks of color, queer folks, disabled folks should be paid to should be paid to experience these trainings, right? That are not prepared for people like us. So I'm not sure that I have said that, in in the passionate way that I feel about it, but this might be a point that we come back to. And with that, I yield with so much respect to Dr. Faye Harrison.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Nadej Tayo Dillon, for taking the lead in organizing this. I appreciate it because it's hosted by the Department of Applied Anthropology at the University of South Florida, which I consider a sibling institution to the university where I worked for a decade. And I regret there were not more occasions for us to cultivate our complementarity. You put anthropology or theory into action. Some of us at the University of Florida tried to do that, perhaps in an indirect way. And we certainly encourage our students to find concrete ways to express their pragmatic solidarity with the people that they worked with as interlocutors, very often as co-producers of knowledge, as allies, or as co-conspirators in some context. But I appreciate being invited to be part of this conversation, this celebration of my colleague Mwenda's 2010 reverse gaze. I met Mwenda perhaps when he was still at the University of Illinois, where I am now as a graduate student, but he was about to achieve that milestone of becoming a PhD. And we began our conversations about anthropology and anthropologies at that time. So I appreciate that you've invited me to be part of this conversation. And I must tell you, Mwenda, I really appreciate that in your book, you seriously engage my work, Outsider Within, which was published 2 years before yours came out. I think in so many ways, we're on the same wavelength. And it's very heartening for me, who in 1993 decided after serving a term as president of the ABA that I needed to go global, all right, in order to really find ways to pursue and implement a praxis as an anthropologist in epistemological decolonization. And so I got involved with the IUAES, and in 1993, it doesn't take much time to figure out that at what we used to call intercongresses and congresses, that there was a conspicuous underrepresentation, if not an absence, of African anthropologists, also anthropologists from global Africa. Very often, I was one of very few Black people. And that led me to develop a conviction about learning more about what my colleagues on the continent and in the global arena were doing, and finding ways to enlist their participation in an organization that claimed to be international, global, but very often was, unfortunately, found itself falling short of that because of these conspicuous absences, because of what UNESCO and the International Council of the Social Sciences in its 2010 report, World Report on the Social Sciences, Knowledge Divides. It documented the epistemological and the institutional and structural disparities among the social sciences worldwide. And so that's where anthropology belongs, within that global context. And we, as well as sociology, political science, geography, on, have suffered from that knowledge divide. because we have been at the heart of what Boaventura Sousa Santos has characterized as the cognitive empire. We've been assigned in the global division of labor to study the other, the non-Western other, or the folk elements of the West. All right, but we have nativized those peoples and communities. We have objectified them as sources of raw materials or raw data. We have cheapened the intellectual labor that has been exercised in anthropological praxis of those communities by assigning Africans the task of being the objects of mining raw materials or being located in sites where cheap or cheapened labor, the labor of informants, but also the labor of professional anthropologists who very often have PhDs, but have been treated as though they are glorified field assistants. So this may sound almost stereotypic to many of you. You say, well, that's dated. That's the way it used to be. But I would say if you do a close reading of the writings, the accounts that Black anthropologists around the world have produced, also indigenous anthropologists and some other subaltern intellectuals, you see that things have not changed enough in 2020. And at this particular juncture, it's clear that all the fractures, the fractions, the contradictions in the social sciences and anthropology in our societies are quite conspicuous because of the impact of convergent crises, the pandemic, economic injustices, but also crises within what many of us are beginning to call racial capitalism. All right, the ugliest facets of this global racism, which Black anthropologists in Africa, Caribbean, and Latin America, and in the United States are using Achille Mbembe's notion of necropolitics to help us understand why so many of us have been existentially vulnerable to regimes of death. And I'm thinking intellectually, we're also vulnerable to what Santos refers to as epistemicide. And that killing may assume extreme forms, or they don't have to be extreme. You don't have to have a total eradication or erasure for death or social death or epistemic death to be at issue. But Mwenda made a courageous intervention by publishing his book. He exposed anthropology's place within the cognitive empire and showed that alternative approaches to doing anthropological work were possible. And he used the device of a reversal. And I have something to say about reversal. I think his book pushes us to think about, well, how can we reposition the anthropological gaze or gazes? Because reversal sort of is based on a notion, well, there's African and then there's Western or North Atlantic anthropologies. And so you reverse the gaze in order to expose the limitations of conventional anthropology, anthropological hegemony. But when we complicate notions of anthropology by mapping a much more multi-centric, multi-sided terrain involving anthropologies, we realize that perhaps reversal is not the best notion. Certainly repositioning, all right, rethinking the epistemic space locations, relationalities, so that we can, as is often called for, we can decenter, provincialize, parochialize North Atlantic anthropology so that it's part of the conversation, but it is recognized as being an embodied partial perspective, as Donna Haraway puts it. And so we can discard with what she calls the God tricks, the sleights of hand, which assume that a Western, usually androcentric vantage point can perform the conceit of being disembodied and having access to omniscient or universal knowledge. You know, African gazes can provide the entry points into a knowledge that has global significance and implications, but within a context of what decolonial scholars call polyversality, rather than the conceits of universality, which a number of thinkers from the South have critiqued, including Sylvia Winter, for instance. The late Archie Mafeji, who wrote against what he experienced and saw as epistemological apartheid, or a South African anthropologist, of course, using an analogy that spoke to him in very visceral ways. But beyond the analogy, we can say that the way Black anthropologists have historically, and even today, despite our advances and the changes, the way we have been located and relegated to particular spaces, even when they are celebrity spaces, causes us to think critically and figure out perhaps new techniques or tactics of developing what are critically nuanced and multifocal lenses that enable us to build upon, but to transcend the potential limits of a notion of reversing the gaze, which suggests that you relegate the West to a type of peripheral zone and let them feel it emotionally and intellectually. And I think that may lead us to a cul-de-sac, but certainly to reposition and to find ways to share or disperse intellectual and institutional authority so that we can address the knowledge divides and the disparities that UNESCO has attested to, and some of us have known for a long time. So I commend you for celebrating reverse gaze, because if not a sacred text, is certainly a significant intervention that I think should be required readings for graduate students and for students who take upper division levels. And I'm happy to be in a network of colleagues who have assigned the book, and many students have been deeply affected by the book. The book has told them that they too can belong to anthropology, but an anthropology that has undergone, accepted the responsibility to undergo considerable democratization, decolonization, and remapping in terms of our understanding of what our relationship is to the world.
So I'm going to now invite Mwenda to speak perhaps on his motivations behind the book. And looking back at the past 10 years since the book was published, if the book came out in 2020 today, would it have a different reception in the US and parts of Africa? What's different about 2020? So I'm gonna let Mwenda speak.
Thank you, Nadej. First of all, what an honor to be the center. I'm always not sure I need to be at the center of anything, but thank you, colleagues, for coming up with this idea. Nadej, we communicated probably 2 years ago when you were studying your work, and I can only remember trying to encourage you to tell you that this is an important discipline and we can't throw rocks from outside, we throw rocks from the inside. So get into the discipline and do it. So it's an honor for me to be here. And indeed, it's so humbling to have this text being discussed and having had some traction in the last 10 years. I want to say that maybe I could try and recollect what happened when I started thinking about this book. Well, as any person who's been in a different culture knows, there are certain things that happen to you that make you much more self-aware and reflective of who you are and what you're seeing. But what came out of my experience, especially when I went to grad school, was slight disappointments. I remember the very first week of being in grad school. I had two conversations with colleagues from the department, and one was with a faculty member who, as we were interacting in a social event, I don't know what we were doing, maybe playing some volleyball, and I might have done something uh, that he hadn't seen, and he quickly asked me, "Is that what you do in Kenya?" And then the second one was with a fellow graduate student who at the time I think was in her third year. And she said, there's something I wanted to ask you. Have you seen elephants in the wild? And I want to premise this with the fact that when I decided to come into anthropology, I had no background in anthropology. In fact, I was in language education. I was interested in music like Tayo, but I wasn't interested in music sound. I was interested in music as text. So I got into analyzing text. And one of my professors told me the kind of interest you have would best be suited in anthropology. So it gave me one of those introduction to anthropology text, cultural anthropology. And I read it. So I had a sense of how anthropologists approach culture. They are more open to different cultures. They take their time before they make decisions. So when these two colleagues asked me these questions, I was wondering if they hadn't had any chance to take like cultural anthropology introductory courses to know that probably there are so many people in the country that we don't have a uniform way of doing things. So I was a little disturbed by that. But then I found myself getting curious and saying, okay, so is there something we have in text and is there something we have in practice? Do we as social scientists, as anthropologists, ever apply the knowledge that we gather when we study and understand other cultures? How much of it does it actually percolate in our own lives, or how much of it is just book and head knowledge? And I found myself asking those questions. And because I was new, I was interested in understanding the culture that I'm in, I found that I kept writing and asking questions and visiting all kinds of places to gather as much data as possible. There was also a yearning for me, and I think this is why this is so significant, because I was interested in how do we apply the knowledge of anthropology. I was interested in, once you gain the knowledge, how do you use it to solve real problems? Because I was coming from a country where very few of us made it to university. And when you went to university, there was an expectation that you'll make a difference, at least in your community or in your region. And so I wanted to see if I could do the same with anthropology. And so I had that yearning. I was also very active in student government. And through my experiences at the university, I ended up forming very close relations with the Black Students Union. And so the matters then we were discussing were trying to see what are the intersections between Black people in the US and Black people outside of the US. And so for me, it was an opportunity to learn. It was an opportunity to connect. And these were undergraduates. So there was a sense in which I was getting a feel of sort of the grassroots of the university. And it was quite intriguing to see the university through their eyes and also compare with how we were seeing it as many of the African students at the institution. But also there was something that happened, and why this is so important is I met a man named Glenn Jordan. Glenn was a graduate student for a while in anthropology, but he didn't finish. And he had come one summer from the UK where he had moved to and wanted to clean up some books that he had left in the Black House, the Black Students Union House. And I was there. We actually met at the anthropology department, said, hey, come and help me out. And I did. And there were lots of books on anthropology, Black studies, some sociology. And he said, you can take some of these. I don't think I'll take them back with me. And lots of them were books of or by Sinclair Drake. And I had never heard of him. And I was fascinated because I started to read some of his papers. And I said, maybe this is what I think Tayo was saying, you educate yourself, you do some extra education. And I got to see that. And I was so fascinated by the work that he was doing in Chicago, the way he was talking about anthropology and his own interests in the discipline, because they allowed him to do the things he wanted to do in demystifying the idea of race. And I was so drawn to that. And I thought maybe I can try to understand why we don't have as many books assigned in our classes on some of these authors that I found fascinating. And that, of course, sparked an interest in what books get to enter into whatever courses, who becomes the person that you're looking out for in terms of your reading, and what opportunities do students have to explore diversely the menu of anthropological offerings. There were other opportunities, and I think I mentioned this in the book, is going to my first AAA conference. And I found it to be it's like another country. There's so many other things happening there. Very, very, very fascinated by the interactions. Had this probably naive sense that because we are so good at sitting at the feet of our interlocutors, we also are good people wherever we are. But there was something very different when I went to the meetings. I could see who didn't want to be bothered by sort of the minions called graduate students. I could see who is trying to see who they can talk to. Most of the conference was mostly outside the rooms. And then I go into some of the rooms and I'm wondering the kind of language that is being used in the presentations. I'm wondering what kind of people are they talking about? So it was fascinating for me as someone who hadn't had any anthropological training. And then I had a chance to go back to Kenya, where now I'd had this opportunity to sort of look at another culture, but also I became so much self-aware that when I went back, it was like I'm having a new set of eyes to look back at my own cultural practices. I think that's what Faye is talking about, repositioning the gaze. So you can actually start to see yourself from a removed position because you've had an experience elsewhere that allows you to set yourself a little bit aside and see the practices that you had taken for granted. So I saw that, and I decided all these experiences should count for something, because I've had the close encounter, as we would say in anthropology, with this culture or these cultures. I've taken copious notes, I've asked questions, I've read relevant text. Why am I not writing about this? And fascinated me to see the process that I started getting into. The more I started writing, the more it became fascinating. And I would read ethnographies, and I can see that this is making sense when I'm writing about the culture that I've lived in, that I've started to get to know some of the cues, what it means to be in public, what kinds of decisions you take, what kind of interactions there are. So I was seeing myself as an anthropologist, even though I had my field site in coastal Kenya. I felt that my experience in this one space was long enough and legitimate to offer me insights into this place that I was. And that's how I got interested in writing. And I found the idea that anthropology becomes a tool for cultural critique as very, very important. And so I said, why not use it when I am here within a place where I have so much access to information and to people, and make sense of it for myself. And actually, I was trying to say, for my friends, family, colleagues in Kenya, what would I tell them about this place that I've been to? Because we have all kinds of images of what the US is like, and my experiences were either enriched by those expectations or probably changed, expanded. And I wanted to create something. And when I started writing, I thought, maybe it's not just for people who have never been here, but also maybe this could be a mirror for some of my own colleagues to start looking at themselves. I had something to say, you know, because I have looked at it from this angle. Maybe they haven't seen it this way, and now I can see that that decision was actually quite apt, because a lot of I would say a lot of students have resonated with the text. I can see that there's some things that they've experienced, and they're articulated in the text in ways that they can relate to. And maybe also see that even though we are struggling with whatever challenges we have as anthropologists, we want to fix it from the inside ourselves. And rather than try to abandon, which is what happened here in much of Africa, is that people abandon the discipline, or they sort of let it be cut apart into different pieces. Like you can do ethnography, you can do participant observation, but in another discipline. And I didn't want to do that. I wanted it to be part of who I am. So if this book was to be written or to come out now, what would happen? I think it might be a very different conversation. A lot has happened in the last, I want to say about 10 years, 8 years, 10 years. You'll probably address deeper issues of my sense of being a racialized subject. It will probably reflect the contrast that I've seen in the national leadership between President Obama and President Trump, and what that has said about the national psyche and the way people look at each other, look at race, look at society, look at others. You'll probably expose the challenges that we face when international politics become almost nationalistic and almost find little groups of tribes of people, whether in France or in Britain or, and the tribes are not primitive people, they're tribes of corporate people, national leaders who feel like their sovereignty is being attacked by these people coming from elsewhere. And probably the book will have a sentence somewhere that says, the US has no moral standing to lecture any African nation on upholding democracy and human rights. Because we've seen what has happened in the last few years, where we thought that probably some certain practices are only possible in some young, undeveloped, struggling states in Africa. But we've seen it right there in the metropolis, in the big cities, in rural America, everywhere, where we thought we could learn something about democratic processes, about championing rights of people, about treating everyone as equal, about not pronouncing anyone guilty until they've been proven so. I mean, all the ideals that we had associated with the US, I think have come to a place where we cannot uphold them anymore. So that book would be having those moments of sort of inward looking nationalism, how racialized I could feel, but also the idea of the Black body and what makes it such a target for the wrong things. And when does it become an individualized self rather than some entity that can be assumed to have certain characteristics before you even have to know them or engage with them. And I think that's where anthropology would be very, very important in terms of engaging with individuals before trying to judge them or place them in certain categories. And so I would say I would still be very much in the discipline. I would be very much encouraging students to study and do anthropology, but to get into those places that we often thought were left for cultural studies or sociology or sociogeography, so that we can tell those stories and move into those spaces and not just tell the stories, but also take some actions. And I think that's what the applied side of anthropology is doing. So that's what I would do, Nandej.
Okay, thank you everyone for speaking on the significance of the book. We spoke about it a lot. We're actually a bit behind, so we're gonna skip one of our prompts because you guys already addressed it. One of our prompts was decolonizing in diversity, which is discussed throughout the book. And Dr. Harrison, well, Faye said that anthropologists of color are still relegated to this sort of second class status, or their work is not seen as theory or knowledge, but as raw data. So just last month, within the AAA community thread, a senior anthropologist was arguing that racism is not a legitimate grievance for people of color. And now we also have Trump's executive order to abolish critical race theory for federal contractors. Trump refusing to reverse the gaze on America, on the ills of this society, seeking to abolish critical race theory and defund government contracts for diversity programs, harnessing critical race, is something that's going on. This is recent, within the past couple of weeks. But we discussed decolonizing and diversity, and I wanted to move on to our next prompt, but I'm gonna ask you guys to limit it to 2 minutes. I'm timing you. So the next prompt is the year of Black Lives Matter. How do we as anthropologists process Black Lives Matter on a global scale? So Mwenda, you can go first, and then Faye, you can go, and then I can address this. 2 minutes. Capiche?
All right. Thank you, Nadej. In this era of Black Lives Matter, first of all, is to just say that it is unfortunate that we have to talk about this in 2020 because throughout history, Black lives have been not only foundational in any civilization, in any activities, but they have contributed to what we know in terms of knowledge production and interactions and explorations. But it is also our own work as scholars that has contributed to some of the caricatures we have of Black people. And the best we can do is to use the same literature, the same writing, the same studies to create the right kind of narratives, the right kind of images, the right kind of identities about Black lives. And to make sure that we don't just stand on the sidelines and say, I'm not the one doing that, it's those people, but also to step in and do the work that we need to do ourselves. We want allies everywhere, people who are committed to using their skills, their talents, and their resources to standing and saying no, because many of us do witness some of the things that are happening and we are quiet about it. And we can't do that. It's not feasible for the good things that we are supposed to do. And also it doesn't help to be the only ones not taking care of our own. So I'd say that it's a pity that it's happening now, but it's a call to all of us to step in the gap in through whatever means that we have, be it writing, be it stepping in our applied work, be it in creating different narratives, be it in teaching our students from kindergarten all the way. Whenever we have an opportunity, we preach it. Thank you.
Yes, when thinking about this prompt, I just thought about the historical depth of anthropological analyses around race. So I don't use the word critical race theory because it's so I do, but it's so focused on critical legal studies. I take a more transdisciplinary approach, and I'm very much interested in how anthropologists have contributed to critical race analyses, rethinking, theorization. And so I think this is a moment where we should revisit the past, sort of do a Sankofa exercise, and really appreciate the work that anthropologists have done for decades, but without the visibility, the valorization that I think is possible now, because I think this is an intellectual and historical conjuncture where more of us are unable to deny that structural racism, all right, in its various facets is a social fact, it's a reality. The very fact that early this year, late last year, in terms of some of the essays being posted, we have named an anthropology of white supremacy, and a collection of brilliant papers appeared in our flagship journal in the United States, which is a flagship beyond the United States, because US anthropology is actually a transnational entity. And if we look at the membership of the AAA, if we look at the purchase or the clout that AAA publications have worldwide, yes. So the anthropology of white supremacy is not just a property or an expression of US anthropology, now it's being entertained across the globe. And I think that's the culmination of many, many decades of hard work, much of it unrecognized, misrecognized, and I must say the AAA, I must commend it for taking the initiative to develop a public education initiative around matters of race and human variation, which historically have been conflated in problematic ways. Yeah, so lots of the seeds of an anthropology of Black lives and the zones of virtual non-being that many, or perhaps most Black people occupy already appear in work that we've done, including the public intervention led by Yolanda Moses, Alan Goodman, and others. And some of us here had the privilege of being key advisors or members of the advisory board. And I saw Irma McLaurin enter. She was a program director at Ford. All together through that concerted action, we were able to affect many people across the nation and beyond. So I think we've done the work. And there are some of us, I think of Joao Cota Vargas, who does multi-sided work in the United States and Brazil. Christian Smith, who works in Salvador, has studied an organization that existed, React or Be Killed, React or Die, in Bahia, that existed well before 2020. So a lot of the convergent crises that I alluded to earlier have long existed, and people around the world have been aware of that. And there have been anthropologists who have aligned themselves in order to collaboratively study those new social movements and the forms of anti-racism and human rights politics that have been fashioned in different parts of the world. So I think, as I'm saying, we have the elements of what this question refers to. And since March, I've been part of a number of webinars and Zoom meetings where we've had people from Kenya, from Brazil, from all over the place, fashioning a common frame to talk about Black Lives mattering. And the fact that still Black lives are depreciated and devalued in ways that make us vulnerable to pandemic diseases, to police terror, to educational terror, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot out there that we need to bring together and articulate and have inform the steps that we pursue now in our research, in our curricular development, in our public engagement.
Thank you, Faye. So this is not the first Black Lives Matter era when considering the Haitian Revolution, which not only empowered neighboring countries in Latin America and the Caribbean, but its impact stretched to parts of Africa, and it empowered African Americans as well. You had US officials like Thomas Jefferson and Abraham Lincoln who wanted to send Black people to Haiti because they didn't want to wanted to curb any possibility of a slave insurrection like what manifested in Saint-Domingue. There are several townships in the US called Hayti, H-A-Y-T-I, named after Haiti. You have historically Black communities like Hayti Durham, Hayti, Missouri. So what's interesting about our current Black Lives Matter era is the digital realm that we're occupying in terms of how we socialize, circulate, and reproduce knowledge. The internet is not this equalizer or like a democratic space, especially when it comes to access. So regardless if someone can afford a data plan, depending on one's IP address, that will dictate what access they have to data in certain websites. But it's harder to expunge and erase our narratives on digital platforms. As many of you know, the Haitian Revolution was silenced and excluded from the mainstream canon. So this is where the geopolitics of knowledge come into play in history. But with the speed at which news circulates and people's ability to retweet, repost, screenshot, and screen record these horrifying images of racist acts, they serve as a reminder for those of us aware of the realities, while it's a rude awakening for the people who believe racism doesn't exist anymore. But we have to keep these conversations going, even if racism isn't a trending item on Twitter. We have to consider which Black lives in the Americas matter, in the Americas. And that's dependent on one's proximity to whiteness and the benefits of capitalism. You know, hashtag Black Lives Matter has become ubiquitous. We see it everywhere now in relation to US race-based issues, but we owe Haiti our attention too. Despite Haiti's digital divide, starting in 2018, Haitian activists took to social media, mobilizing the masses with their own hashtag movement, seeking accountability for the misuse of billions of dollars from the Venezuelan oil subsidy. So the ensuing hashtag PetroCaribe challenge confronted government officials of impunity in the face of brazen corruption, reflecting their neglect for Haiti's Black lives. And this all happened while I conducted fieldwork last year in Port-au-Prince. So you have intellectuals and journalists who speak out against corruption who are then mysteriously murdered. And I guess as a Haitian American, it's my job to liaise these efforts towards building solidarity about our shared struggles. Hispaniola and other parts of the Caribbean and Latin America weren't just drop-off points on the way to the US. The Black experience started in Hispaniola, and we need to take heed and spotlight these movements going on elsewhere, especially in Haiti. The first known slave uprising wasn't in 1619, it was in 1522 in present-day Dominican Republic, where Blacklist is highly contested, but this is part of their history, whether they like it or not. And Haiti was the sacrificial lamb fueling Black Lives Matters movements with an S, and empowering capitalism at the detriment of the Haitian masses. Haiti was the richest colony in the Americas. A lot of people don't know that. They were producing the world's coffee and sugar. But now we always hear this trope, Haiti is the what in the Western Hemisphere. I'm not gonna even say the word. So we owe Haiti our attention, engagement, and support. And I think now that we're more connected and challenging narratives about Haiti, I think now is a great moment to do this. So look into hashtag PetroCaribe Challenge as well if you're really concerned about Black Lives Matter. So now we're gonna go to the last theme. Remember guys, 2 minutes, because we wanna have plenty of time for Q&A. So the last theme is maneuvering tensions between optimism and pessimism for the anthropological discipline. What lies in its future? So we look back, we reverse the gaze, now we're looking forward. And I believe that the text reverse gaze can help us with this endeavor of looking forward. Throughout reverse gaze, Mwenda, you convey this tension as far as your love and disenchantment for the field. And in the end, you make recommendations to push the fields forward. And when I say the fields, I mean African anthropologies and American anthropology. So briefly, everyone gets 2 minutes. So could you elaborate on this? And I invite all the speakers to discuss this tension in the field between this optimism that you have for it and this pessimism and how we can move forward. Mwenda, you can.
Thank you, Nadej. I am very optimistic for the future of the discipline because of the tools that it helps develop. And I think as Tayo started by saying, anthropology allows you to study people in their own terms. That optimism has to be pushed by a focus on current affairs. And so that allows us now to breathe into the things that are happening now, bring the depth of analysis that anthropologists bring so that we can tease out some of those nuances that get lost, I think, in the fastness of things. The discipline will have to expand. The discipline will have to accommodate many voices, opinions, perspectives, theoretical approaches. The discipline may also allow for expanded ways of sharing what we would call the products. I think while we would want to have sort of the flagship journals, there should be other ways of doing this that are also highly respected. So we don't have the hierarchies of if you don't publish in this journal, you're not as highly ranked. It should allow for continuous conversations in those products. So some living forum that allows for people to go back 2 years back and see what was this discussion and today, without closing that conversation, but also allowing people to speak into the past texts, as I think Faye aptly mentioned, and bring out the best of them, and also show how they can be improved. I'm not sure, though, if we can be as forthright as we would want to be, especially as we continue to see the dwindling in terms of resources to support research. And so, again, maybe we need to use the less expensive means of gathering data, maybe more transnational collaborations, so people can be given the same topic and they work on it in their own spaces and combine those results so that they can produce some text that speaks to all the experiences from different parts of the world. That way, I think we will not lose that edge of an anthropological insight. But also, I think the training of students should be emphasizing these new modes of doing anthropology. I don't know if we can continue to have the same kind of research methods that we had before. We need to have new ways of gathering data, of sharing data, of interrogating statements in ways that allow everybody to participate. And as much as possible, help us co-author products with the people that we study. Thank you.
Hey, you can go.
Thank you. I think the very notion of a decolonial anthropology speaks of our finding ways to forge spaces, a multiplicity of spaces, so that more diverse people can participate in the anthropological project. And I don't have a monolithic or consensual model of the anthropological project, although I have always advocated what I call a critical anthropological project. But I recognize that those who disagree with me have every right to participate in the larger anthropological enterprise. Anthropology, and this is from an organizational point of view, worldwide is under assault. The social sciences and humanities are under assault. They are being abolished in universities in Europe and other parts of the world, or if the departments continue to exist, degree granting programs have been basically dismantled. So within the IUES, a lot of our time was spent defending anthropology in various parts of the world, making a case for its existence, its significance, and its future within higher education. Anthropologists in many parts of the world are under assault, in prison, have been targeted by death squads because they dare to speak truth to power and social justice. And I would say even in this country, at this particular moment, we're experiencing what sometimes is called a neo-McCarthyism. So maybe more of us, will be targets for sacking. I mean, my university actually sacked a Palestinian American scholar because of his critique of the Israeli state. Terrible precedent to be made, within the last 5-6 years, but it has implications for how universities and academia in a much broader sense is being reorganized in ways that, on one hand, to accommodate more of us. That's a positive thing, perhaps, although we should not confuse demographic diversity with political or epistemological diversity and decoloniality. They're not the same thing. But also, the restructuring is assuming forms that put many of the units in which anthropologists are hired in jeopardy. So these are things that we need to think about, perhaps, as the structural and institutional and programmatic context within which we make our brilliant epistemological interventions. And I agree with Mwenda. I think this is the best of times and maybe the worst of times. It's the best of times because there are precedents that have been made for taking the notion of collaboration and the co-production of knowledge to heart. So it's not a buzzword that gets appropriated and hackneyed in terms of how many times people sort of appropriate that language without changing a darn thing. But I'm very heartened by collaborative work, for instance, coming out of the Latin American Studies Association under the leadership of anthropologist Charlie Hale, the Otros Saberes project, about 7 projects around the Americas where you had Afro-descended, indigenous, and academic anthropologists, some of them in Latin America, a number of them based in the US, working collaboratively around projects that basically were defined by the civil society organizations, the movement organizations, or the communities that were the foci of these projects. And I just think that's so important. The projects that find ways to go beyond the politics of English as a global language. You know, we have journal editors, we have researchers engaged in transnational collaborations, translating works in both directions. I think things in English being translated, for instance, into Portuguese so that indigenous and Afro-Portuguese graduate students, undergraduates, and activists can have access to the work being done on Africa and the African diaspora in places like the United States, and translating the work, for instance, feminist activists in Brazil, Afro-feminist activists in Brazil, and in the Spanish-speaking Americas into English, so those who are not Latin Americaness can sort of expand the contours and the parameters and the perimeters of our understanding of what constitutes Black feminism and Black feminist knowledge production. There's so many fantastic and I think constructive projects being taken to breathe 3-dimensional breath into the notion of public engagement, collaboration, and experimental ethnography. I mean, what does that mean? And what do our interlocutors think it should mean? And so we're in a position to take seriously these voices, not just as people who were the old-fashioned human subjects, objects of knowledge from which we mine raw data, but people who themselves are intellectuals, whether of the vernacular sort or just the everyday quotidian sort. We're all intellectual, capable of thinking critically, and we're at a point where I think for anthropology to be refreshed, to be able to be sustainable, we have to go about anthropological practice differently, including the practice of producing theory and theoretical discourses, taking seriously that there are multiple modalities of analysis, and theorization. And perhaps if we do want our grandmothers or our cousins or people from our home communities or people from the communities that we have adopted to be part of the readership and the conversations concerning those texts or those films or those websites, those graphic novels that come out of ethnographic inspiration, then we have to be self-critical, do a cultural critique of ourselves in order to figure out how can we basically remake ourselves as intellectuals of the sort to usher in that next phase of humanity, in which questions of ideas and knowledge and power are central.
Thank you, Faye. Let's hear from Dylan, since we haven't heard from you for a while. Then Tayo can go, and then I'll finish so we can get to the Q&A. I know you all probably have a million questions. So Dylan, please share the tension between pessimism and optimism.
Sure. In brief, I mean, I tend to be pretty optimistic. At the same time, I'm in a lucky position to be in an applied department that is dealing with and talking about a lot of these issues and have been talking about some of these issues when it comes to anthropology for quite a while now. But I think, you know, as anybody who has been working a lot this year on especially applied projects having to do with COVID-19 and the pandemic, it's been a tough year to find things to be optimistic about. But at the same time, because I've been in these sort of quick moving, immediate anthropological intervention style projects this year that have been a lot of collaboration with lots of different folks and with lots of different interlocutors. And it's also been, I think, because of that, a year to find some optimism in terms of what we can do, you know, with the field. And it sounds maybe a little cliche, but I think we need anthropology now as much as probably ever before. And so it has to do with things like, you know, inclusion and who is being included in this project and who is being excluded, how are things being framed. You know, so, you know, obviously I think the best thing anthropology is going for it. One of the best things is that we're openly self-critical and we have, you know, plenty of openness about, at least I hope we can be open about the ways that we understand ourselves and the work that we do. It's one of the most important things about working on a good team of people is that, you know, you can call each other out on your biases and such, and that's proven to be really great. But the other thing, actually, I'll just say the last thing is we're still obviously learning. And a year ago, I don't know if anybody would have imagined that we would have all been together on this thing called Zoom. I'm not sure if I knew what Zoom was a year ago, but here we are. And I think that, again, is enough to give me some hope and some optimism. So with that, I'll turn it over here to my colleague, Tayo.
Thank you. Let me preface this by saying that I am in an Africana Studies unit in the School of Interdisciplinary Global Studies at University of South Florida. Perhaps I shouldn't have said that, but it's important to actually keep this in mind. I'm not in an anthropology department. I have a number of points to speak to, so please bear with me if I will try as best as I can to stay within the 2 minutes. First, the term diversity and also inclusion, I find it to be dangerous. There is a danger to a celebration of difference where difference and authority no longer becomes meaningful. And this is a point that came up in reverse gaze itself. So this question brings up to me, do we actually want to participate? Do we want to call for inclusion? Do we want to, call for a diversity within a problematic system? So that's one. And as much as anthropology is openly self-critical, we're also openly self-congratulatory. And, as much as we call out our biases and we call each other out, these biases persist, and they have persisted for years to the extent that, not just within the discipline, but in this broader world, as Nadej just pointed out, this is not the first moment, the first era of Black Lives Matter, right? As far as where I stand, I being in an Africana studies program, being in a essentially a Black studies paradigm, I stand for my people. That's where I stand. And I would say, drawing on the performance studies theorist, Jose Munoz, I disidentify with anthropology. I disidentify with anthropology because the discipline, like this world, is not faithful to my freedom. So I navigate within the discipline, taking what I need, extracting what I need. And I'm not necessarily committed to an anthropological project. I am committed to the liberation and freedom of myself and my people. That's it. And I don't know who said this, who brought this to my sphere, but someone said that decolonization is necessarily extractive. Right? So Dr. Harrison, you've pointed out like the pitfalls of an extractive anthropology, where we are extracting the knowledges and the resources anthropologists are from the people that we are studying. And we can actually use those same methodologies in service of our liberation, participating in a system in which we are not necessarily valued, but taking from it what we need and taking it back, right, to our people, to our communities, so that we can actually work together in the service of our freedom. And the thing, the unique thing, in addition to paying attention to the histories of work done on Black lives and Black freedom, there is something very unique about this moment, about this activist moment. And there are a number of things to point out. First of all, there's a politics of formation in terms of querying who is on the front lines, who is putting their bodies on the line. That is who you follow, right? That's who you follow. You follow people on the ground, placing their bodies on the line, right? And in addition to that, there is a disavowal of respectability politics. There's a disavowal of the assumption, right, of what it means to be human. There's a disavowal of the idea that you need to be respectable, that you need to present in a certain way to have your life, your value recognized, right? And so this calls for what some of my colleagues have called fugitive anthropology. So if activists on the ground are querying the politics of solidarity and the politics of allyship and calling not for allies, but for accomplices, right? And think of that word, accomplice, right? An accomplice is someone who is participating with you in the commitment of a crime, right? So that means that the work of liberation renders us, invites us all to fugitivity, right? So what is called for in this moment is a fugitive anthropology, or I like to think of it as an underground, like, you know, going into the underground, retreating from this world, this system not faithful to our freedom, and extracting from it and taking what we need in order to seek our freedom. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Tayo. I'm gonna wrap it up because I want us to have about 30 minutes of Q&A. So in terms of the future looking forward, I'm the least senior on this panel, so my perspective is gonna be different because I have the least amount of experience in the field. But when it comes to this text, I was happy after reading it because it reminded me of why we do what we do. So I invite those of you who haven't read the text to put this on your syllabi, to read it, to take notes. I think it's important for the next generation of anthropologists like myself to read refreshing texts like this one. As for the field, American anthropology is an extension of American culture, which is rooted in, classism and racism. And we have to think about the political economy of anthropology and how it's been used to depict third world countries to reify certain policies concerning development and intervention. And I think that first the change would have to be outward first. So meaning American culture would have to change first, and then it would spread to American anthropology. In this book, Mwenda, you mentioned how you had group mates in a class who are unable to adequately complete an ethnographic project on a local African-American community, yet scholars want to go conduct research abroad. You know, you have people who are culturally alienated to the Black experience in the US. And I think people need to wake up, you know, but we see people who are challenging these skewed, unnuanced, ethnocentric narratives. And you can see in the flyer that I made for this event, there's a Black woman being photographed while someone behind her is capturing her from the back. So for those of us who have access to multimodal devices, AKA cell phones, people are recording wrongful policing of Black lives. So we, you know, we must now be wary of artificial intelligence that's coming for us now. But we have been raising our voices, and this is tying to the AAA event series theme. From the hashtag Black in the Ivory to hashtag Black Lives Matter. I think we're in an interesting time, and I look forward to reading more scholarship that challenges anti-Blackness while also celebrating different cultures. I hope that I will be one of those writers imparting this one day. So now let's go to the Q&A, because I know everybody's anxious. People want to share their screens. You can type some questions in the chat. You can use your raise your hand feature. But I got to shout people out first. It's the Brooklyn Way. Lisa Armstrong, hey girl, hey. We got Rachel Watkins in the house. You know, we got Nina Glick Schiller. I invite you all to, or anyone who's interested, to raise your hand to ask a question or input the question in the chat, because we want to leave some time for you to engage with the speakers and myself if you have a question for me. So if anybody has a question, please put it in the chat or raise your hands. Comments, but brief comments, but we mainly want some questions. Okay, so I see one for Tayo. Dr. Jola Osho, for individuals being trained in the field right now with intentions of becoming activists, what advice do you have for being able to adequately acquire and apply the tools of anthropology for pressing social justice forward and doing fugitivity, as you said? That was a question for Tayo.
So I'll take this, and I'll also transfer the question to Mwenda because I can. So I remember, oh gosh, I remember when I was a grad student and I received a fellowship for for archival research at the Smithsonian Institution. And I had the opportunity to interview the inimitable Dr. Bernice Johnson Reagan. If you do not know her, get to know her. So I asked her, right? She is the founder of Sweet Honey in the Rock, an African-American a cappella women's group. She was a founding member of SNCC, and they actually used song, right, as part of the civil rights movement in the United States. So I asked her essentially this same question, right, about how to be a scholar and an activist. And basically she told me I had to be an activist. I had to be an activist. And what she meant by that is I had to figure out my position, my role in the struggle. And it could not be one of detachment, of scholarly detachment. I had to be willing to go where people were who were doing the work of laying their bodies on the line, who were doing the work of strategizing, like, for the movement, for the struggle. I had to be there with them, committed with them, putting my body, my mind with them on the line. And that is essentially what is called for. It is a commitment, a shared commitment, not an individual one, but a shared collective commitment. And it is community, it is the collective actually that checks you. You have to know when to follow, you have to know when to lead. So that is where I'll start. And this is where I pass it on to Mwenda.
All right. If you're being trained now in applied anthropology and you want to go into activism, you should be doing two things. One is gaining the skill of analysis, of listening, of talking to people, of engaging in conversations that are happening at the same time. The next step is for you to decide, out of those skills, where are you needed most? Because we can't do everything. Where are you needed most? Where do you have the passion and the ability? We always say that availability is not always ability. We want the movement to be filled with people who can offer something and keep it going. And in activism, I think you have to understand that you need to be in it for the long haul. It's not the flavor of the month kind of thing, where if it is this one, you move there. No, you stay with it and build something. And then cultivate and share those skills with others who have not had the chance to be in your position, to be trained in an institution that gives you the kinds of skills that we have as anthropologists. You have to be reproducing others every day so that the momentum carries all the time. That's what I would say.
Okay, thank you. We have another question. So what advice, and this person is asking the panelists, what advice do you have for first-year graduate students who are going into a predominantly white institution and anthropology department, especially in terms of the risk of over-visibility, risk of being placed in a box, how to deal with adversities due to being an accomplice? Does anybody want to take a stab at this question? I'll repeat it. What advice do you have for a first-year graduate student going to a predominantly white institution in an anthropology department?
Dr. Harrison, please.
Well, I tell people who contact me who are interested in applying for graduate school that they need to do a sort of online ethnography of the department and the university to make sure there's more than one person who can potentially mentor or supervise them, because that one person may die, may take a leave, may take a different job, and then they're left in a vacuum. That is very important to develop a network of support among the faculty, the graduate students, and within the university. There are other disciplinary and interdisciplinary sites that might make for the types of conversations that the student or the applicant anticipates being fertile and enriching and imperative for their intellectual formation as anthropologists, or I will say as intellectuals and social researchers who may appropriate, and I would use appropriate rather than mining in this case, the best tools that anthropology has to offer to contribute to social justice projects. All right, if that is the goal of the student in the long term. But it's important to, define someone who, even if it's one person, I suppose, who shares the vision and can articulate that vision and play the role as an advocate for that student. I think advocacy, that's a term that doesn't mean the same thing as activism, but I think activists need to be embedded in broader networks where some people play the role of advocates, because the advocates have to watch the accomplices back, sometimes defend them, make a case for them in places where an accomplice is not permitted to go. So I think we have to broaden our notion of how we take anthropological data analysis and theory into social political action. I think, we need to diversify that terrain and see that everyone cannot be or is not inclined to be on the front lines, to put their bodies there. Some of us have done it in the past, but I think you have permission later on in life to shift roles and to think. So we have to think in terms of what would be a division of labor among justice-seeking anthropologists or intellectuals trained in anthropology who have a repertoire of skills that come from anthropology. I think there are lots of ways to use the tools of anthropology to do good, whether one welcomes an identity as an anthropologist or not. It's just, I made the decision that I would work within anthropology and do what Mwenda says, figure out how to throw stones within the house. But Sinclair Drake, who was a major source of inspiration, appropriated tools for the liberation of global African people. And he was not invested in being recognized as an anthropologist. And I've reached a point in my life where I'm thinking, I just want to be an intellectual who does the sort of work that hopefully can leave a legacy. And I'm not working. I do have a position or an appointment in anthropology, but it was not anthropology that recruited me to the last three universities where I've worked. And so I think, well, what does that mean? Who is valuing my work and what I do for training, let's say, undergrads and graduate students, which I do to benefit departments of anthropology, but very often the people who see and understand the bigger picture of what I do are people outside of anthropology or people who are positioned at crossroads of knowledge. So contact people, do that ethnography to figure out who are these people and who basically will watch your back. Or be honest with you to tell you, maybe it's time for you to go from a master's program to a PhD program someplace else, because they are invested in your overall well-being and future, rather than in shoring up numbers for their particular department to make them look good and develop the metrics they need to sustain their institutionalization. Sometimes that's hard to do. I know many students who are isolated in departments. They seek outside mentorship. I've mentored many of people unofficially, some of which have eventually earned PhDs in anthropology. So one has to have, I think, a strategy of broader mapping, situate the specific PhD programs in a much broader context, and develop the sort of networks that one needs to sustain one's commitment to a field whose meanings and parameters far exceed those that appear on a mission statement on a department's website.
Okay, thank you, Faye. To answer the question quickly, I think if you're going into a predominantly white institution, be yourself, but also do what Faye suggested, do your homework, figure out if you can build allyships and if you can gain support from your multiple advisors. And I consider myself lucky to have such a great advisor in Dylan. And, I think it's important to have somebody who believes in you and values your work and can take you to the finish line based off of your vision. So I consider myself very lucky, but yes, do your homework and try to find different allies and different advisors who will support you in your vision and not tear you down and with just toxicness. Okay, so we have Enrique Gomez. Because you raised your hand and I'm guessing you want to share your audio, I'm going to let you ask your question, but I know we have a bunch of questions coming up in the chat. If you guys don't mind staying on a little bit after 5, then maybe we can address these questions.
Hi, thank you so much. This was the highlight of my day, week, semester, everything. I'm a graduate student, second year graduate student, and at our program, a bunch of us that don't fit the norm came together with two faculty members and started a group that it was for us to be safe and be able to talk about this course that it is rooted within anthropology. And so we're trying to start some anti-racist trainings and workshops where it is a conversations that we have where it's a safe space and people can talk about hey, it's not okay this, or be aware of this. And not only for our cohorts, but for future students that are looking at people like me, queer Latin American guy, who's trying to succeed in academia, but can have somebody be like, hey, if he can do it, I can also try to do that. Do any of you have feedback of how can we progressively have these meetings where it's not just hey, racism is this, it's just definitions, and it's something that people should know, but also we want to have them be more aware of hey, we exist, we need these spaces. And I don't know if that makes any sense. And I'm saying this because a lot of these trainings are very definition based, and a lot of time people just sits there and then fulfills their white guilt and then leave. And we are trying to do something different, but one of the reasons I'm here is because this is so insightful and so amazing, but to incorporate it, I was just, yeah.
So I'm not sure I understand the question, but I do hear you saying that in this current moment, right, where there's a lot of emphasis on training, right, it seems to be a lot about defining concepts without moving beyond that, right? So for me, this seems to be one opportunity to ask for an ongoing dialogue, or to ask for some kind of ongoing commitment beyond the one and done workshop, right? And there are a number of possibilities for what that dialogue can entail. But it seems to be one of moving beyond the initial, session into something more ongoing.
Thank you.
So we have some other questions. So in the chat, Nina Glick Schiller, she asked, how are we going to use this energy to address the massive dispossession about to happen with no funding for public universities, scholarships, fellowships, public scholarship, or research? Are we prepared to combat the rhetorics of austerity, which will be coupled with racist attacks on people who have looked to public institutions and funding? That's a heavy question. Dylan, do you want to take it? Mwenda, do you want to take it? Dylan's like, no. Anybody want to take a stab at it? It's a big question. How about Dylan? Come on, don't be shy.
Sorry to jump in. I would love to open it beyond the panelists as well, but Dylan, please go ahead.
Oh, thanks for giving that one to me. Yeah, this is obviously not an easy question, and obviously there are people working on this. I'm going to say though, I just think from our experience, in some ways, public institutions right now are doing well in some ways, depending on their models. I think that there are a lot of private, small liberal arts institutions that are going to be dealing with some of the economics of this. I mean, there's an entire system of the way higher education is funded right now that is being, called into question. And this is actually one reason you could look at this, for people who have had, rough experiences in higher education, or they've become jaded with higher education. This is maybe an opportunity for things to change. But, I think at USF, our enrollment is up, and, that's an interesting thing. Why are people coming to a big state university right now? What are we offering? And so actually, I think there's going to be a lot to learn from this. I don't want to say anything too much, but obviously we have, the pressures on the administration, and there are some old battles that we've been fighting here in terms of how our higher education is funded. But I mean, it's intimately connected with all of our discussion. But we'll see. That's about as well as I can do on that one.
Tayo? Did you want to add to that, Tayo?
I'm just interested in what the broader room is feeling and thinking about this moment. I mean, I can always say something, but I'm curious.
Room? Anybody who wants to take this on, raise your hand.
So Africans will tell you something different, but go ahead.
Who's NX? NX, I see NX raise their hand.
Hi, so my name is Nakaja. Sorry, I just I put that there. I love that question. I was gonna say a way for us to address it, I feel like personally, is getting into policy work with the government, like trying to address procurements and making sure that funding is being dispersed appropriately amongst our people specifically, because a lot of times it's not done. So I think that is the first step. So in order to do that, you have to hold the government accountable, and you have to create a lot of policy work to make sure that they're doing what they're saying that they're going to do. So I think it starts with that, and especially given COVID-19, because they have the funding, they have the grants, they have it there, right? So it's just making sure that it's going to the right people. I know that I go to George Washington University, and I'm working with our procurement office now in the nation's capital, because a lot of times a lot of funding isn't given to Black business specifically in the area. So you have to hold them accountable to make sure that they're doing their due diligence and making sure that they're delegating the funding correctly. So I think that is a start.
Yeah, thank you. We have a bunch of other questions, and it's almost 5. If you guys are willing to stick around, especially Mwenda, it's around midnight, almost midnight where you're at, so you might be tired. But I want to see if we can get just a few more. I know someone asked, Dr. Ntarangwi, I'm wondering if you have any ideas for new methods that you would be willing to share with us, research methods.
Maybe I can say that, tied to even the other question that was just asked, is to be creative enough to use multiple people to do the work. I think it's always very attractive for us as anthropologists to want to do all the work ourselves, but I think there's value in getting different pieces from different people, and especially if we can get people who can provide a different lens. I know a while ago when young people were given cameras, And the only thing we're told to capture was the beauty of their lives that they live, wherever they are. And that brought so many images. And then they were asked to discuss why this is beautiful. And so you have opportunities to have multiple participants. I think it's the co-production that Faye was talking about, where you have many people, different sites, simultaneously doing something that is related, and then curating that into different stories that say something about the human condition. And sometimes you don't need, I want to say we don't need a lot of funding to do the work. If you are located, if you're doing the research in the location where you are, you can use that to do some of this work. But also I like what has the speaker just before said about entering into policy making as well. And that is an important role. I can tell you now that I am in public administration. It is so important to influence from all sides, and we shouldn't shy away from that.
Okay, so a good question, another good question is, how do you feel about your college's diversity of academic resources? Are students readily supplied with authors from all over the globe? So I think mainly USF is represented here, and then we have Faye Harrison at the University of Illinois. So I don't know who wants to take a stab at this question.
Can I say that I am heartened by the fact that I have colleagues who are open to having conversations about how to rethink their syllabi, how to rethink, for instance, the way they teach anthropological theory. So that it's not a replication of, the dead white guys approach. And I have been an external reviewer of graduate programs and departments where these conversations are being held about how can we reorganize to truly globalize the teaching of anthropology, or it can be any discipline, beyond an additive model, because a lot of people intuitively respond on the defensive that, well, how can we teach Durkheim, Weber, Marx, et cetera, with all these people around the world? And so rather than thinking, beyond that additive model, which you quantify and you extend the amount of time, you have semester 1, semester 2, so you can cover, think maybe thematically. And if you assume that intellectuals all around the world have asked, basic philosophical or theoretical questions about human society and the world, then it's clear that the professors have to retool themselves, all right? And I think that the typical additive models are part of the problem, that since they have not learned how to read interculturally as well as intertextually across cultural and epistemological boundaries, they basically are not equipped, they're not trained to have basically a pluriethnic or a polyversal course where you have African, you have Roma, you have a range of authors. But I think what used to be the Committee on World Anthropologies had a teaching research subcommittee that I served on and chaired on for a short while that produced syllabi. And I don't know where they have stored these materials, but there have been people who have developed and collected syllabi from around the world so that we have the teaching resources to to start thinking more creatively and critically about who are the authors and who are the texts that our students should be exposed to, that we ourselves need to be exposed to teach about how anthropologists all over the world have done theory work in relation to the empirical work of the ethnographic method.
Thank you, Faye. Tony White had said, I wanted to say something about how people who do want to maintain their identity as an anthropologist should be prepared to be comfortable with having a fragmented sense of self. So someone wrote in the 90s, Jackson, not the Jackson in our department, but you know how anthropologists, when they're doing field work, they have this sense of liminality, of being between two cultures. And I think I see what you're getting at. And for me, when I did research in Haiti, my parents are from Haiti, but I was born in the US. So I was an insider and outsider. So not only did I have the aspect of where I'm sort of in between two cultures, yes, but I was born an insider and outsider. I was born being liminal. And I think as people of color, you know, we deal with that a lot. And, you know, coming back from the field, it was intense because I was in Haiti for 3 months straight. And I know anthropologists spend years in the field at a time. So I can't imagine how undone or sort of reoriented I would feel. But I know upon doing field work, I knew, I was like, this is going to change me. And it was only 3 months of me just going to do field work in Haiti. I said, this is going to change me. And it did. And I had to sort of recollect myself and figure out who I am. And I did have feelings of where is home? Who am I? Do I still want to do work in Haiti? I almost had this sort of existential crisis after that. But a year later, fast forward, I feel full and robust after that experience. So I'm not sure, I mean, I'm just a student, so I'm not sure if that was a good answer to your question, but I think being a Black person, I always feel marginalized. I always kind of feel like, I don't fit in. And especially when we do field work, being in this liminal space, and depending on where you do field work, if you're a Native anthropologist, if you're a citizen at that field site, even so, I was diaspora. So it's like, she Haitian, but she got that money, or she has connections. And, you know, they charge me the premium price. You know, I'm a certain color. I'm a, you know, and you know, Faye Harrison has written, you know, in parts of Latin America and the Caribbean, money whitens. So I'm saying I'm going to Haiti, yeah. And then it's like, they see me as a blanc, as a white. And I was like, whoa, like I had to think about the different sort of definitions and the different ways people define Blackness, because hypo descent is not uniform across the Americas. So that's just my perspective as being, you know, a young woman of color, of sort of feeling undone. But then I can say a year later, I feel like, reversing the gaze to a year later, I feel so much more robust and full from that experience that has changed me for the better. We have to wrap it up. We're 8 minutes past. Oh, you're gonna say something, sorry.
I am gonna say, and so may I begin by just sharing my closing thoughts?
Of course, yeah, let's wrap it up, guys.
So there are two things, or who knows, what I just feel a need to clarify something about the politics of formation, right? Where it's not calling for everybody to literally put your body on the line. It's not calling for everybody to be on the front lines. However, it is calling for a deciphering and an interpretation, right, of your positionality and the formation of the struggle around you, right? This is, I mean, I'm chair of Beyonce Studies. I'm also chair of Beyonce Studies at NYU. Beyonce Studies at NYU doesn't exist, but if it existed, I would be chair. So formation, okay? Yes, so part of what this moment is calling for is the necessity of following who is on the ground, who is on the, who is at the front lines, who leads, who follows. When are you able to lead? And when must you just recognize and follow, right? And the principle always is you follow the leadership of those on the ground. You follow the leadership of those at the front line who are willingly putting their bodies on the line. That's one, first and foremost. There are multiple roles, multiple skill sets, multiple tools that are called for in a shared liberation struggle. And yes, Dr. Harrison, as you have pointed out, we need advocates. We need, and also just going back to Dr. Bernice Johnson Reagan, she gave the example of 1976, Soweto, South Africa, right? And children protesting against that law that said that Afrikaans was going to be used as the only language of education, right? And so you had children, school children, on the front lines. Didn't mean that their parents didn't have a role. Their role was to be on the sidelines, comforting their children, pouring water, offering water to soothe their tear-gassed eyes, right? So you have a role for everybody in the struggle, whether or not you are on the front lines, right? So sometimes you need to be that parent, ready with water, ready on hand. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm gonna let Dylan go, and then I'm gonna let Faye and Mwenda have the last words so we can wrap this up.
No, I mean, I have really no final words. We're already a bit over time. I'll just thank everybody again for coming, and thanks to the panelists for being a part of this. It was a real pleasure.
Faye, if you have any final words, and then we can let
I just want to thank you. I think just from reading chats, and I know how I feel, this roundtable is deeply appreciated. This is a moment when we need to connect on these sort of terms. So I wish all of you very well, solidarity to the future of however you use the tools, that anthropologists have co-produced, sometimes in spite of many obstacles along the way. So I feel heartened that what I believe is important is in good hands, with the younger cohorts of students and junior faculty. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Nadej, for this almost military position in your organization. I was really impressed by how well you put this together. I said, I wonder how your classes would be when you start serious teaching. I think your students will be well trained. And I want to encourage us to do that which we are passionate about. I would never have thought that this text would be read by more than 3 people that I had coerced to read it. But because I was passionate about it, I hope that the passion was kind of transferred into others. And don't ever put out that fire in you. I think that anthropology has allowed me to be self-aware and to be analytical, but also to understand the complexities of this world. And I'm a better human being for my ability to listen and to empathize with others, which I think the discipline has helped me to do. Right now in my new role, I am finding that anthropology has been a wonderful tool to help me navigate different bureaucracies. And so for the students that are among the team that is left here, keep going. As Faye said, find your allies, find your advocates, and use the resources. You will have to do double the work because you need to educate yourself as well and get the extra work done so that you can come and share with others. You are a pebble that hits the water and there is diffusion so that you can influence others in ways that will make you a better part of this system. And I want to thank you very, very much for doing this and look forward to many more opportunities to discuss such kind of work.
Yay! So thank you everyone for joining us on Indigenous Peoples Day. Thank you to our unseen co-hosts, Shay Wright, Lisa Armstrong, Fendaki Wumi, Chris Ann Hines, who helped us into admitting you all. This was a big endeavor on Zoom, but considering that we would all have to be at the same conference to all be in the same room together, I mean, it's a blessing that we were able to congregate together on this platform. And I'm so happy that you came here. Tayo, music, please. Bye-bye.
Time flies like a thief in the night.